Have you ever wondered who really rules the world? Not the presidents you elect, not the parliaments that pass laws, not the courts that interpret them. There is a greater power, a power that operates in the shadows, that needs no votes, that does not answer to the people. A power that, with a simple rate adjustment, can determine whether you keep your job or if millions lose their homes. Welcome to the true center of global power. An empire without borders, without flags, without visible armies. Welcome to the world of central banks. Think about it for a moment. Who has the authority to create money out of thin air? Who can decide, in closed meetings, the fate of entire economies? Who has the power to save failing institutions or let them sink, determining the destiny of millions of workers? The untold story begins at the start of the 20th century. On a stormy night in November 1910, when a select group of bankers and politicians secretly boarded a train in New Jersey. Their destination, Jekyll Island, an exclusive coastal resort in Georgia. Their mission, to create an institution that would give private bankers control over America's money supply. 3 years later, the Federal Reserve was born. Neither federal nor reserve. A peculiar hybrid between public and private entity, designed with a deliberately complex structure to hide a simple truth. The power to create American money was now in the hands of an institution controlled by private banks. But this was just the beginning. The real coup would come later. Until 1971, the global monetary system still had an anchor. The American dollar was convertible to gold, limiting how much money the Fed could create. But on August 15th of that year, President Nixon closed the gold window. Suddenly, for the first time in human history, all currencies in the world became mere paper, legal fictions backed by nothing more than the promise of governments. And who controlled these fictions? The central banks. Imagine the extraordinary power this represents. The ability to create wealth from the vacuum, to determine who receives the newly created money and who doesn't, to decide which institutions survive and which perish. But you might say, they exist to serve the public good, to stabilize the economy, to control inflation. That's the official narrative, the story we've been told. The illusion they've sold us, the reality. Consider this. In 2008, when financial collapse threatened to engulf Wall Street, the Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars in emergency programs. How many of those trillions went directly to save ordinary citizens losing their homes? Zero. Instead, the money flowed to the very banks that created the crisis, to the same financial institutions whose executives continued receiving million-dollar bonuses while the real economy bled. Do you think this was accidental? A flaw in the design? Now, look more closely at who really controls these central banks. The Federal Reserve has 12 regional banks, each literally owned by the commercial banks in their region. The Fed's Board of Governors is dominated by former Wall Street executives. The revolving door between private banks and the central. Banks spin so fast it's almost impossible to distinguish where one ends and the other begins. And this pattern repeats globally. The European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. Institutions supposedly designed to serve the public, but invariably aligned with the interests of the financial sector. If this is starting to shake your certainties about how the world really works, keep watching. Because what we're about to reveal will completely transform your understanding of global power. Subscribe now to not miss any hidden secret of the system that governs our lives. The genius of this system is its near invisibility. When we think of power, we imagine presidential palaces, parliamentary halls, military headquarters. But real power operates in discrete buildings, in closed meetings, in technical language incomprehensible to the ordinary citizen. In 1987, Alan Greenspan assumed the chairmanship of the Federal Reserve, a devotee of Ayn Rand and fervent advocate of the free market. Under his leadership, the Fed adopted a policy of asymmetric market intervention. Never interfere when asset prices rise, creating bubbles, but inject massive liquidity when they fall, protecting the wealthy from losses. This became known as the Greenspan put, essentially a free insurance policy for Wall Street, paid for by ordinary citizens through the silent inflation of their living costs and the stagnation of their wages. And while this happened, another, even more dangerous process unfolded: the complete capture of governments by central banks. Consider the European debt crisis. When countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy faced fiscal difficulties, the European Central Bank did not hesitate to impose draconian conditionalities democratically. Elected governments were forced to implement severe austerity policies, cut essential services, privatize public assets. The message was clear: democracy has limits. Voters can choose whoever they want, but fundamental economic policies will be determined by central bankers. In 2015, when the Greek people voted overwhelmingly against the austerity package in a national referendum, what happened? The ECB simply threatened to cut liquidity to the Greek banking system, forcing the government to implement exactly the same policies that the people had rejected. This isn't democracy, it's governance by funding. But you might ask, why don't elected governments resist? Why do they submit to this influence? The answer is frighteningly simple: debt. Global public debt has reached unprecedented levels. The United States owes more than $30 trillion. Japan, more than 230% of its GDP in debt. The European Union, similar amounts. And who buys this debt? Who determines the interest rates that governments pay? The central banks. A government that defies its central bank quickly finds its funding rates rising, its bonds devaluing, its currency under attack. The threat doesn't need to be explicit. It's built into the very structure of the system. And so we arrive at the essence of the fourth power, a power above the three traditional branches of government, a power not elected by the people, but which fundamentally determines their living conditions, a power whose authority derives not from the Constitution, but from control over something even more fundamental: money itself. But the real masterpiece of the system is how it perpetuates itself through narrative control. Think about how central bankers are portrayed: as neutral technicians, as wise guardians of economic stability, as experts above dirty politics. This framing serves a crucial purpose: to depoliticize what is fundamentally a political question. After all, what could be more political than deciding who benefits from money creation, who is saved and who is abandoned during a crisis, how wealth is distributed throughout society? By transforming these fundamentally political questions into technical issues, the central banking system effectively removes them from the realm of democratic debate. Have you noticed how monetary policies rarely appear as central themes in election campaigns? How few candidates discuss the structure of the Federal Reserve or the ECB? This isn't accidental. It is a result of decades of careful social engineering to convince the public that such matters should be left to the experts. And these experts, invariably, come from the same financial system they supposedly regulate. Former ECB President Mario Draghi came from Goldman Sachs. The current U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, received millions in speaking fees from Wall Street before taking office. Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs. The list is endless. Would you trust the regulation of the food industry exclusively to former Monsanto executives? Then why do we accept that monetary policy is determined almost exclusively by those whose interests are intrinsically tied to the banking sector? But the power of central banks goes far beyond traditional monetary policy. Since 2008, we've entered completely new territory. Programs like quantitative easing have allowed central banks to buy not just government bonds, but corporate debt, mortgage-backed securities, and even stocks. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from less than $1 trillion before the crisis to almost $9 trillion today. The Bank of Japan is now one of the largest shareholders in the Japanese market. The Swiss National Bank owns billions in Apple, Amazon, and Google stocks. This isn't free market capitalism. It's just centrally planned capitalism, with central bankers deciding which sectors of the economy receive capital and which don't, which companies thrive and which struggle. And all this without a single vote, without meaningful democratic accountability. The slow dissolution of democratic sovereignty doesn't just occur during crises. It's an ongoing process, accelerated by each new emergency, by each new exercise of emergency powers that are never fully returned. Think about the stark contrast. While social programs are constantly scrutinized for their cost, while public hospitals and schools face budget cuts, central banks can create trillions with a mouse click without parliamentary debate, without public approval, without real limits. And where does this money go? To financial markets, to banks, to the already wealthy. The result? The greatest wealth inequality since the Gilded Age, a system where social mobility has stagnated, where the middle class is being crushed between rising costs and stagnant wages. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this new regime is the surveillance power it brings with it. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are now in development in more than 100 countries. At first glance, they seem like a natural evolution of money. But look closer and you'll see something deeply disturbing: the ability to track every transaction, to monitor every purchase, to freeze accounts instantly, to implement programmable money that can only be spent on approved items or that expires if not used. Imagine a future where your access to money can be cut off with the touch of a button, where your spending is monitored not just by credit card companies, but by the state itself, where smart money can be programmed to reward desirable behaviors and punish undesirable ones. This isn't science fiction. It's the explicit plan. The Bank of England already publicly discusses the possibilities of programmable money. The People's Bank of China has already implemented expiration features in tests of its digital yuan. The merger of monetary power with digital surveillance represents one of the greatest threats to human freedom ever conceived. And it's being implemented with virtually no meaningful public debate. Which brings us to the fundamental question: is there a way out? Is there a way to reclaim democratic sovereignty over money and, by extension, over our economic lives? History suggests that systems of power, no matter how entrenched, eventually encounter resistance. And that resistance begins with awareness, with clear understanding of how the current system really works, of who it really benefits. Central banks depend on obscurity, technical complexity, the myth of apolitical expertise. Their greatest protection is public misunderstanding of their true role. Think about it. Why don't schools teach how money is really created? Why does money creation, perhaps the most important process in any modern economy, remain a mystery to most educated people? Because public understanding would represent a fundamental threat to the current system. If people understood that money is essentially a social construct, a tool that could be designed to serve many instead of few, the legitimacy of current arrangements would be seriously questioned. Have you ever wondered why markets react so strongly to every word uttered by a central bank chairman? Why a phrase from Jerome Powell or Christine Lagarde can send trillions of dollars in market value rising or falling instantly? It's not just because their decisions affect interest rates. It's because, at a deeper level, markets recognize where the true power lies, not at the ballot box, not in parliaments, but in the boardrooms of central banks. That's where the fate of nations is really decided. That's where true priorities are established. That's where the future is shaped. And most concerning is that this power continues to expand. Each crisis, whether financial, pandemic, or climatic, is used as justification to further expand the authority of central banks, to push them even further into domains traditionally reserved for elected governments. The Federal Reserve now explicitly considers climate change within its mandate. The ECB is actively exploring its role in the green transition. As noble as these causes might be, they represent a significant expansion of central bank authority into areas of public policy that should, in a healthy democracy, be decided through democratic processes. This is the true meaning of the fourth power, a power that transcends not only national borders, but also the traditional boundaries between public and private, between politics and economics, between democracy and technocracy. A power that, by its very nature, tends to expand, to accumulate more authority, to infiltrate more aspects of our lives. The question for you, for all of us, is whether we will passively accept this evolution, whether we'll allow fundamental decisions about the structure of our societies to be made by unelected institutions dominated by financial interests, whether we'll surrender our collective future to a technocratic elite that claims to know what's best for us, or whether we'll demand something different, whether we'll insist that money, this fundamental social tool, must serve the public interest, not just the privileged, whether we'll fight for a monetary system that is transparent, equitable, and genuinely democratic. Because, in the end, this isn't just an economic question. It's a deeply political one. A question of power, of who holds it and whom it serves. Central banks aren't forces of nature. They aren't inevitable or immutable institutions. They're human creations designed by specific people for specific purposes. And like all human creations, they can be redesigned, reimagined, rebuilt to serve different values. History hasn't ended. The current system isn't the end of the evolution of human institutions. It's just a chapter, one we can choose to rewrite. So, as you contemplate the immense power that central banks have accumulated, as you realize how they've become the true rulers of the modern world, ask yourself, is this the system we desire? Is this the balance of power that best serves human aspirations for freedom, justice, and shared prosperity? If the answer is no, then the time has come for education, for organization, for collective imagination, for conceiving viable alternatives to the current system, for fighting for a financial architecture that expands human freedom instead of restricting it, that distributes opportunities instead of concentrating them. If this video has awakened your curiosity about how power really operates in the modern world, prepare for what we'll reveal in the next episode. Because the fourth power is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that, once assembled, reveals the true structure of global power. The final question I leave with you. In an era where money is power, and the power to create money is concentrated in unelected institutions, can democracy really survive? And if not, what kind of system are we really building? See you in the next episode of Vault of Secrets, where we'll explore the global web connecting central banks, multinational corporations, and the new frontier of social control, surveillance capitalism. True power isn't the one that shows itself. It's the one that remains hidden, operating in the shadows, silently shaping the world around it. And nothing shapes our world more profoundly than control over money itself. Whoever controls money controls everything.